Beautiful. Good morning and welcome to the session. And people are just starting to drop in. Really happy to have everyone here with us today. I want to go ahead and just welcome everyone and say thank you for taking the time to come out to this session. It's a really important topic, and there's been some interesting immigration changes from a policy perspective, and this is a wonderful opportunity for employers to learn more about workplace inclusion of newcomers to Canada and some really strategic, tactical considerations when building culture and policies um, and, and initiatives, as well as an opportunity for students to have some Q&A time with this panel at the end, towards the end of the session, coming into 1 o'clock. So we're really looking forward to engaging with everyone. And thank you so much for attending. I'd like to move into a land acknowledgement, please, on the next slide. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which I work and play is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I have a short, quote that I hope you don't mind that I'm going to read from a really beautiful book. It's by Richard Wagamese, and it's called Embers, and it's just Embers. It's a really beautiful opportunity to just kind of drop in. And I'm also inviting you through the chat function, if you would like to share the land that you're on, you're welcome to do so. And native-land.ca is a beautiful site if you're unsure of where you are in the territories and the nations of the land that you're on, then it's an opportunity to go ahead and do that and look into that as well. Did my message show up okay in the chat? Beautiful, thank you. Okay, so 3 strands in a braid of sweetgrass. They represent 3 spiritual qualities, maybe love, kindness, humility. When I smudge myself, I purify myself in those qualities. I prepare myself for the day with the strength of those spiritual qualities. The smoke clings to my hair, my clothes, and it remains in the air of my home. As I move through the day and smell that fragrance, I am reminded of how I have chosen to live. And in that is the power of greeting each day with reverence, calm, and prayer. And that is how I learn to direct my humanity towards peace, equality, and harmony. One day, one person, one circumstance at a time. I just absolutely love this book. It was gifted to me. I do quite a bit of work with various Indigenous nations, and it's a really beautiful opportunity to just acknowledge and understand a little bit more about the sweetgrass and some of the thinking behind it. Beautiful. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So that was our lovely land acknowledgement. And the next slide. Great. So today, I am just going to walk you through the agenda where we've started, of course, with our land acknowledgement. We're super, super happy to be partnered with Sodders and Technology and People Network. We're in a beautiful partnership putting on this event today. We're going to do some panelist introductions followed by a really engaging discussion around inclusion of newcomers to Canada, as well as sort of the policy changes that have recently happened in Canada and what might be important for employers to know and understand moving in to the future. And then we're going to move to a Q&A that is directed for employers, and then move into a beautiful opportunity for students to engage with the panel and with employers who might want to stay on the call. And then we'll move into just our acknowledgement of our beautiful sponsors and thanking everyone. So thank you so much for being with us here today. Next slide, please. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Kathy Gibson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the senior project manager and consultant with Technology and People Network on the diversity, equity, inclusion portfolio of work, if you will. And so I've just been so honored that I've had the opportunity to manage several key programs aimed at creating more inclusion and diversity in the tech ecosystem here. And so I've worked on a number of sort of high profile projects, including multiple provincial sector labor market partnerships, inclusive of stakeholder engagement and research and intel and strategy and recommendations, and helping with some of the policy and the launching of the BC Provincial Nominee Tech Pilot back in 2017, which is now part of the mainstream offerings, as well as Global Talent Stream. And I've presented at parliamentary hearings. So immigration is very close to my heart, and I'm very much involved with a number of not-for-profits. I work as an HR director, and I work in talent strategy and diversity, equity, inclusion, and all these beautiful places. And I'm also a trainer, a neuro change solution trainer with Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so that's a little bit about me. And I am just super thrilled. If you can, the next slide, please. We have with us here today the very lovely Angela Lorie. Angela, we're so pleased to have you here. And thank you for the partnership and setting all of this up today. We're just absolutely honored to be here in partnership. Would you like to go ahead and just say a few opening remarks?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, and welcome everyone who's here joining me at the Stoddard Building today as well. I'm Angela from the Employee Relations team at UBC Stoddard's Business Career Center, and our focus is to support students and new grads in their personal and professional growth. And today's event is a beautiful and wonderful part of that mission. It's really great to see everyone, so many employers and students here today. And I'm also very grateful to TAP Network and the Immigration Employment Council of BC for partnering with us to bring this conversation to life. Definitely special thank you to Kathy, who has been working with us since the summer to shape this session into what it's going to be today. And hopefully it's going to be a valuable experience for everyone. To our employer partners, thank you for your commitment to building an inclusive and diverse tech sector in Canada. Your dedication to embracing talent from all backgrounds strengthens our workforce and drives innovation. And the insights that you share today with us will empower students and new grads to connect their unique skills with the evolving needs of the industry as well. To our students and alumni, both virtual and in person, thank you for joining us. I know many of you have pressing questions as you work to navigate your career paths here in Canada. And, we put together this because we figure you might be curious about how Canadian employers view international experience and how to align your unique skills with a career that inspires you. And today's panel will explore these topics with some practical tips for your future applications. And for any personal questions related to your visas or work permits, please do reach out to your international student advisors, your dedicated resource for immigration-related questions. So last but not least, we're really excited to be part of this journey and eager to dive into these important discussions. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, thank you so much, Angela. Perfect. So we can go ahead to the next slide, and I'm very pleased to introduce Patrick MacKenzie. Patrick is the CEO of the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. He's made a career of public service from coast to coast, working in policy and program areas aimed at supporting many of Canada's most vulnerable communities through economic and social development, as well as international relations. Previously, Patrick spent 11 years working at IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and its national headquarters in Ottawa, and also in its regional offices here in Vancouver. Throughout his career, Patrick has worked with partners on many matters affecting Indigenous and immigrant populations, including immigrant economic integration, provincial nominee programs, credential recognition, and labor mobility. He's been a longtime friend and colleague. Super happy to have Patrick here with us today. Patrick, did you want to say a few words?
Oh, thanks, Kathy. I really I want to thank Solder and the TAP network for bringing us together here. TAP's been doing fantastic work to truly create spaces like this so that we can connect sort of us community serving organizations, students, and employers. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Patrick. Amazing. Next slide, and we're going to introduce Lorie. Beautiful. Lorie Corcuera is the director and learning and development the director of learning and development at MindSense Technologies, a clean tech company that provides revolutionary technology and data solutions that help mines maximize global metals while minimizing global impacts. Lorie is a strategic people and cultural expert, executive with over 25 years experience in culture and talent and belonging, strategy and implementation, executive coaching and leadership alignment, learning and development, organizational change and design, diversity and inclusion, mental health and well-being, and elevating workplace experiences that inspire purpose, connection, and impact. Her pronouns are she, her, and we're just so happy to have Lorie here today. She is on a mission to create cultures and communities where everyone feels they matter and they belong. Leading and loving by example is her mantra, and Lorie's a UBC alumni with a Bachelor's of Commerce and is a certified professional coactive coach through Coactive Training Institute. Thank you so much for being here, Lorie.
Thank you so much. I wasn't sure if I was going to have to read my bio, and I feel bad for writing such a long tongue twister bio, Kathy. Thank you so much for the introduction. I just want to welcome everyone, the employers, the students. I'm a UBC Commerce alum. It was back in May '99 is when I graduated, so it was a long time ago before it became Sauder School of Business. But every time I have an opportunity to connect with my school, I just feel, yeah, my heart is really beating for all of you. Yeah, I do want to add just one thing about the lens that I'm speaking from. So the reason why I said yes to Kathy when she invited me to do this talk was because my parents were both immigrants, both from the Philippines, and they immigrated to Winnipeg, Manitoba in the early 70s. And that was kind of when I was born as well. And I saw the struggle that they had coming into a new country, English being their second language. So, ever since then, I've always been connected to volunteering at Dress for Success and helping newcomers or immigrants or even women in general, especially the BIPOC community. So yeah, I feel very grateful that I have an opportunity to share. I will be speaking a lot more from the culture perspective, but I'm also very passionate about leading ourselves, and so from a personal and leadership development perspective as well. So thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Amazing, Lorie. Thank you so much. Excellent. Next slide, please. So happy to have Teresa Duke with us. Teresa is a leadership and executive coach with a deep passion for helping others bring their gifts to the surface. Having led talent and acquisition and talent development in various organizations and serving as a recruiter and coach for some of the biggest names in tech and entertainment, she's empowered leaders to harness their potential and find the spark that truly brings them alive. With nearly 2 decades of experience driving growth in tech and entertainment, she's worked with companies ranging from startups to SMBs to industry giants like EA, Activision, Blizzard, Netflix, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, and more. In addition to her passion for building businesses and helping leaders thrive, Teresa is dedicated supporting students by interviewing MBA, MM, and MBAN applicants for Robert H. Lee Graduate School at UBC Sauder School of Business. I'm really happy to have Teresa here. Again, I'm just so happy. I think I've known everyone on this panel, just so everyone knows, for like at least, I don't know, a dozen years or something. So these are like people that I think the absolute world of, and I have so much to share. And I'm just welcome, Teresa. Would you?
Thanks for having me. And I'm really honored to be here to be of service to two of my favorite populations, which is, of course, student population. That's why I still interview students, because I think that there's a lot of rough interview experiences out there in the world. And so if we can give some good ones and help treat people as well as they deserve, that's a big passion of mine. And with employers, working with employers who are doing their best to hire wonderful talent and make a good experience for you. And so if there's, you were talking about a little extra something about us, while I love working with people to help them understand who they are, where they're going, and be able to understand what excellence looks like in their field, whether it's corporate or whether it's the individual. The thing that is big for me is how can we infuse joy? How can we somehow enjoy this and get the most out of this for ourselves with the limited time that we have here? So that's me. Thanks again for having me here.
I'm so happy to have you. Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to dive right in. We've got, I'm conscious that I want to strive to just make this as impactful and as we have so much to share with this incredible group of humans. So I want to dive in with Patrick to start. Patrick MacKenzie is the CEO, as you might remember, of the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia, and he does a lot of national work. And is quite a thought leader in terms of immigration policy. And recently the government of Canada has announced a policy reduction of how many PRs are being accepted into the country. And Patrick, maybe to start, were you surprised by that announcement, or what were your initial thoughts?
No, I mean, I wasn't surprised by that, Kathy. I mean, Canada's a country that has had historically and sort of long-standing high levels of support for immigration, and so immigration of all types. So your economic, your social, your humanitarian, your permanent, and your temporary flows. But we know that the public discourse has changed a bit around immigration over the last year, and just in terms of while there's still a great deal of support across Canadians, they're calling into question the interplay between immigration and housing and access to education and healthcare and other parts of the community. And so, no, I wasn't surprised to see the reduction, and it was a significant reduction over what had initially been planned. But keep in mind, these are still
21. Was it 21%?
Yeah, it was about 21%.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that there's still historically high levels of immigration happening. I mean, much higher than we're used to. And it's only in the last number of years that we've seen the number of permanent residents go up over 400,000. The last time we saw that was actually 1913. We were giving away land and trying to populate the West at that point. So we're still talking about significant numbers who are coming here.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I guess, so largely these decisions are sort of economic from the perspective of like infrastructure. It's like, are we building the infrastructure to support the number of people that are coming is a big piece of that equation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the conversation for sure. Now, what's worrisome is that there are some people out there who are trying to equate immigration with the problems that we're seeing with housing supply and education, like accessibility of education and our healthcare system. For sure, you bring 1 million people to the country, it's going to create demand on housing, but that is not the reason that we're in the spot we're in. I mean, it's 35, 40 years of underinvestment in housing is the bigger problem here. But from a public policy perspective, the easiest, cheapest, and fastest way to relieve some of that pressure is to then reduce some of the numbers in terms of immigrants that would come into the country, both temporary and permanent. And so from a public policy perspective, I can see where they're coming from with this.
Okay, I see. And then, so 2025 is just a couple months away. And what immediate impact can we expect sort of out of the gate?
Well, I mean, from a macro policy, macroeconomic level, I don't see a huge impact. Schools absolutely are already seeing the impacts in terms of the reduction in visas for international students and the caps that are being put on it. And schools have been put in a really tough place because they were told to be, their funding had been capped, their tuition fees have been frozen, all over the place. And then they were told to figure out an entrepreneurial way to make up the shortfall. And so this is where international recruitment has become so important to so many schools' ability to function. So I have to, and I mean, I'm not in post-secondary, but I have to imagine you will start to see more immediate impacts in those areas. But overall, I see this more as an opportunity for Canada to step back and sort of recalibrate and say, okay, for immigration, who are we selecting to come into the country, and talking more on the permanent resident side. And of course, one of the things that they are clearly saying is that we want to see more two-stage immigration. So it's that folks who do come as international students, folks who do come as temporary residents, temporary foreign workers, are going to form a significant, if not the lion's share, of those who do become permanent residents.
Right.
The thing though to be careful of is that not everyone will become a permanent resident. Right? Just because you come as a temporary resident does not guarantee permanent residency.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's very important for employers to also just be aware of the opportunity, I suppose, around international students that are here, that are educated, and that have been residents.
Well, for 50, 60 years, we've been talking about foreign credential recognition. We've been talking a little bit of lack of Canadian experience, and then, of course, language ability as barriers to meaningful employment for newcomers. And so, in both employers, and for the 40, 50, 60 years, employers and immigrants have both identified these three barriers, when asked. And so international students, I think, are a tremendous opportunity for employers because they have a Canadian credential. You're not dealing with questions of foreign credentials. And then at the same time, we know that if they're studying, clearly they can communicate in English or French, depending on where they're studying. And then there's the opportunity for co-op and other ways for students to demonstrate that they do understand sort of the Canadian context.
Amazing. Okay, this is all really, I think, just super valuable in terms of just setting a bit of a stage of understanding, from an employer's perspective, like what's actually happening with immigration policy nationally, and then, also from a strategic perspective, as a director of HR, I'm kind of going, okay, if I may not have access to, and we all, this is a conversation all the time, right? Employers often say, coast to coast, as you would always say, like, people we're looking for talent, right? And there's often internationally sought after talent that everyone in the globe is looking for as well, right? And so there's certain positions that are just difficult to hire for. And so it's that skills piece, I think, that you were alluding to, while also we know that people are looking for work. And so what's happening there in terms of?
Like the competition's fierce. I mean, other countries have looked to Canada, and Canada has arguably had the best immigration system in the world for a very long time. And I say arguably because clearly there are things that could be done better. Don't get me wrong, but other countries have been paying attention, and they've been building systems that basically take from the best that we do. And these other countries are looking for the same talent that we are. They're looking for the innovators. They're looking for the entrepreneurs. They're looking for the folks that can drive growth. And so, as a country, we do need to be really mindful of that and think about what is that brand Canada that we're putting out there and selling to the world.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you, Patrick. I want to open up the dialogue now, and sort of dive in from an employer's perspective. What are some of the what can we do, right? And so when we look at, and I suppose first of all, I just want to really highlight that we know, I've been a director of human resources for over 20 years myself, in-house, as well as consulted with lots of different companies. And I think there's, it's widely known that international students and alumni offer, they're very, very talented demographic, and that they have often, extremely diverse experiences from abroad that can really contribute to organizations in terms of, innovation and creating that, really amazing kind of in team sort of dynamics where you're storming and norming and like creating that dialogue so that we can innovate and create, better products and better services. And so I wanted to just perhaps highlight, a couple of interesting, stats around this. So there's been research, for example, that for every 1% increase in ethnocultural diversity, it leads to a 2.4 increase in revenue and a 0.5 increase in workplace productivity. So it's like, we know that there's tremendous value in building diverse teams. And, so I want to really like frame that when we're going into this conversation, because we've all had, I know that all of our panelists have had such tremendous experiences. I know I have in hiring the most motivated, the most hardworking, incredible international employees, and the value that it's brought to the organizations that I've worked with. And so I thought we would open it up and kind of think about this from an employee life cycle perspective, and kind of dive in and start with sort of that attraction and recruitment piece around, how do we attract as employers international individuals who have the skills we're looking for to us? Anyone like to take that and start?
I'm looking at Teresa just to see and give her that space, because she's got the background for attracting recruitment. I can add to that from an internal perspective as an employer, what we're doing.
So why don't I start with like the outgoing, and you can start with like the employer. How about that, Lorie? So in terms of the recruitment itself, it seems obvious, but not everyone is doing this, which is opening up your sourcing. So being able to spend, fund, I know it could be like, oh no, don't spend money, but funding the ability to source great talent. So many people just post and hope. We call it, it's a terrible term, spray and pray, but in terms of all the different job sites, but investing in the ability to source talent from multiple pools, whether it's, your new grads from certain places, all sorts of, different countries, things like that. But the sourcing helps with accessing much more diversity with your talent pool. And then, of course, doing the research on different kinds of job boards and things that are out there that aren't just the usual ones, but ones that can access more specialized talent, and ones that would attract audiences internationally, and people that are just, maybe they don't understand the regular job boards that other people just tend to default to as organizations. So a diversity in job boards. And then another piece of it is the presence in the communities. So just like, we're doing a talk here and we're having conversations and we're accessing all sorts of different wonderful populations in one forum, if you do have a recruitment team, having presence in the communities, going to functions at ISS of BC, that's Immigration Services Societies of BC. I remember sitting there one time and had tremendous amounts of beautiful talent, people coming up and wanting to connect and looking for opportunities. So having a presence in different types of communities. So that's a very outwardly focused recruiting sourcing perspective. Lorie, do you want to take the baton from there?
I can. So just to build upon what Teresa's talked about, I thought about, as we were preparing for this, I was thinking about what we had done in a previous employer where we were really focused on diversity inclusion and specifically neurodivergent community. So one of the things that we created, keeping that in mind, which is applicable to all people of diverse backgrounds, is the candidate experience and providing as much information even before they start interviewing. And so what we did is we created a candidate guide that really anything to minimize any assumptions or anxiety or questions. We provided information of what their interview process was going to be like, step by step. We even gave them some overview of the type of questions that we would ask. We provided, even information on how to prepare for the interview in terms of a remote environment, because we were a remote company. So think about, how can I really ensure that I'm creating the most welcoming experience, and put yourself in their shoes, what kind of information, and over communicate, because then that will minimize any nervousness, and just lay it out so it's really clear. Because even from newcomers, whether they come from a different country and a different language, you have to think about that. So you want to make sure that the communication and language is taken into consideration. And if you even want to, if it's more of a diverse environment, like at the time, we made sure that we always introduced ourselves with our pronouns. We had a land acknowledgement. We were inclusive. We provided information about, Canada and our Indigenous community. So, think about, as much as possible, information that will be helpful for the candidate.
Amazing.
I got one more for you, Kathy.
Yeah.
This kind of goes in, it's a step before what Lorie was mentioning, but one way to lose incredible, wonderful variety of talent from all over the world is to have a terrible interview process. It's something I feel very passionate about, and I'm pretty, I would bet everyone here has had terrible experiences before. And it can be quite difficult when you don't realize that it's not you. It's the employer hasn't perhaps done their due diligence on their interview process. And the hard thing is many companies don't invest in it and don't know how to do an excellent process. So if you are to keep it simple, and maybe you don't have a lot of funding, maybe you're a smaller company, it just depends, but keeping it simple with a nice, consistent screening process, some very simple questions for a 20-30-minute interview for up to mid-level, 45-minute for senior, and keep those questions nice and consistent so that you can have a pretty consistent viewpoint across multiple populations that are coming in. And my, I mentioned Joy before, I was like, can it be kind, right? Can that interview process be a little bit kind? Because, it's hard enough to interview, let alone coming in with English as a second language. I'm always humbled by all of you wonderful people that interview in a second or third language. It's just, it's unbelievable. So having some just simple kindness, some simple consistency can do incredible things to elevate the quality of your talent. I have had people sign up with companies that I recruited for because they were treated well. That's it. And because they moved fast enough too. So that was what I would offer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa. I think that's such an important point. We can do recruitment really poorly, or we can do it really well. And it is an investment, and it's an investment in sharing information in advance to create that. It's already an anxiety-provoking experience for an average human, right? So it's like, how do we create that sense of ease so that we can actually get into a dialogue and understand if there's a mutual fit in terms of the skills that are being, how do we draw out the information in that interview process while keeping it really consistent across the board. And I know when we talk about even assessments, that's often, with technology and people network, obviously we work with there's over 250 tech companies that are part of our network of members. And, often, technical assessments are part of that equation. And, I'd love I know that I've worked a lot with technical assessments over the years, as well as sort of the soft skills pieces, but just curious if there's thoughts around that.
Do you want me to jump in again, Lorie? Yeah. Okay. So there are certain pieces of the interview process, like an assessment, that hopefully are the easiest things to do correctly, because there's so much difficulty involved with the soft skills, the communication, the leadership. Those can get a little bit more qualitative, a little bit more difficult to evaluate. So if you're going to do the quantitative piece, right, like do that one right. So for example, with hiring engineers, that you have a very You have a very consistent, very invested, very tested, embedded internally. You can embed it with your own people. Have some kind of test that you do very, very well. Then you can make it easy on yourself with the rest of it. It's also a lovely, makes things a little bit more, it level sets easier as opposed to the difficulties that you can have with more of the qualitative analysis when it comes to recruitment. Lorie, have you got anything more on that?
Yeah, I worked with a lot of different companies that some were like against assessments or any type of tests, and some were okay. We want to use it, and currently we're using predictive index as one of the assessments for recruitment. The only thing I would add to that is just know that it's a point of reference, but it's not the end thing. Like don't make your decision just based on the assessment. There's so many different factors from the interviews, different perspectives, making sure there's a diverse interview, a group that's interviewing your candidate. And yeah, just look at it all different aspects, because I feel like we really need to personalize the experience and really get to know the individual and not make any assumptions. Like one of the things I would start off by saying, if there's anything I would want anyone to leave here as an employer, is that you are a leader, and so it's really your responsibility to understand yourself and be more self-aware, understand your biases and whatnot, and then make sure that the rest of your team and company are doing the same thing, because we're going to talk a lot about systems and process and candidate guides and all of that, but at the end of the day, it's the individual showing up as their best self, and we've got to start with ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And there's one point of clarity, Kathy, like there are assessments for technical skills like Python and C++ and all those different things. That's where I was talking more of. And then what Lorie was referring more to is the profile assessment.
Exactly. Thank you. And Patrick, you mentioned the other day something about even like mother tongue assessments. Is that out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, so at Immigrant Employment Council of BC, while I'd say we're situated in the settlement sector, we're very much focused on what do employers need, and looking at employers as the ultimate gatekeeper to employment. Generally we will get hung up on conversations around foreign credential recognition, but keeping in mind that 80% of the labor market's unregulated, so you don't actually need a credential to do most jobs that are out there. And clearly, if there's very technical skills that you're looking for, you want a certification that's different. But for us, we look at sort of assessments in two different ways, and very much like Teresa and Lorie have talked about. We work with industry leaders and businesses and associations and educational institutions to do technical assessments. And so in IT and biotech and life sciences, accounting, finance, and a number of different areas. At the same time, we've also worked with employers to say, like, why don't you hire? Like, why do you say no to a candidate? And a lot of it came down to sort of the I guess what you'd term as the soft skills. It's like, how does a candidate sell themselves to the employer? And Canadian students right out of university often have a hard enough time with that. And folks mid-career can have a hard time with that. And so for newcomers walking into a completely different context than they would be used to in their home country, clearly they run into challenges with this. And so what we did in working with employers and with service delivery partners, so ISS of BC was mentioned earlier, they were one of them, the YWCA and a handful of others. So we looked and said, okay, what is it an employer is looking for? And how do we make sure that programming prepares candidates for exactly that? But at the same time, can our service delivery partners deliver it? Right. And so, and then sort of that third piece is, can the immigrant candidate actually, does it make sense to them? So if you think of a Venn diagram, we're always trying to get in that little spot that little bit of overlap between the employer, the service delivery agent, and the newcomer themselves. And so, we look at sort of providing solutions both to the employers and the immigrant that can help with that more the soft skills side of things, so an assessment and some training on it, assessment and in some cases training on the technical skills. But to your question there, though, Kathy, around sort of language and mother tongue, is for employers in looking at how they assess folks. We want to help get to a point where we can disentangle whether it's a language issue or it's a skills issue. And so if you could do a skills assessment in mother tongue, and turns out they're geniuses in that field, they just can't communicate in English. And so then you can train to that. You can help that. You can give that individual sort of the help there. But at the same time, some employers will still be able to hire them, but with some adaptations in the workplace, depending on the job and depending on the workplace. Like you can't expect every employer to be able to hire someone who can't speak English, right? But we have seen models where some folks use Google. Some employers have used Google Translate to communicate.
There's technology for this now, right?
Well, this is it. And in some cases, they'd hire cohorts. So you hire 5 people who might speak one language, but one of those 5 people can also speak English, and they can act as the interface in there. And then there's a provisional language training, maybe in the workplace, and that language training can be provided for free in some cases by agencies that are already paid to do so.
Yeah, Teresa, you had an example of that kind of situation before, haven't you?
Yeah, I worked with a wonderful partner, Sarah McKay, in a company at one point where we had a person interview who had tremendous technical skill at a senior level in terms of their skill set as an engineer, but we really struggled with the communication. It was heartbreaking because they were so great. And then she came up with the initial idea, and we formulated as a team where we decided, okay, so maybe there's some way we can hire this person. And so we worked with the Immigration Services Society of BC and we decided to extend the probationary period from 3 months to 6 months. And then we did up some legal documentation around getting them language training through the ISS of BC. And with that, they had to have an initial evaluation as to their current level of language and what we needed based on the guidance from that society about what we needed for them to operate at a senior engineering level, which was what the position was. And so we also had learning and development budget of a few, like just over $1,000 or a couple $1,000. I can't remember the exact number. And we used that money to support the language training. And so this person was able to get the job. They also had their plate full because they were learning English in the evenings. And then they had a brand new job in a new country with all the newness. So they worked incredibly hard. It was quite a challenge, and they met all the agreements for the 6-month probationary period, and then had continued on and stayed with that company for years as an absolutely dedicated, successful engineering member of the team.
Amazing. Yeah. I love hearing these success stories where it takes a little ingenuity to just sort of bring the pieces together to have that all align. That's so beautiful. Amazing. I wonder if we would move forward with onboarding and just talk a little bit about, okay, great. Let's say that we've now attracted, or, we've maybe had considerations around the languaging in our job postings when we're looking at attracting people as well. Like, is the language inclusive? And now we're onboarding our new employee, and they've in some cases they've moved away from their homes and their family. It's like they're showing up. What do we do to ensure that they feel included from day one? What are some of the steps that we could take?
Yeah, I can start with that. Teresa, you good? We're just going back and forth with each other. Coincidentally, this is something that we're designing and implementing at my current place at MindSense. And for me, as I shared before, it always starts with the individual. So we're really wanting to make sure that the experience that we're providing is more human. And when I talk about human, we're starting off with that one-on-one check-in, and we're guiding our managers from like the 30, 60, 90 days, what type of conversations and tools that they have that they can use to get to know the individual. And I'll start off with one of the tools that we've introduced or will be introducing is the partnership agreement. And so I'm a certified coach, and one of the things that we learned is to create a designed alliance with our clients. And the purpose of that is that we want to build trust. We want to ensure that the client or the coachee feels really safe to be, to have a very authentic and supportive conversation. So why not take the similar concept for people, leaders, and their team members? It's the same thing. It's all relationships. We're trying to build that relationship. And so the partnership agreement is already, the language of it is already inclusive, because we're saying that I'm, the team member and the people leader, they're partners in this. This is a partnership that they're engaging in within this, what happens to be a workplace environment. And so in that partnership agreement, we provide questions that guide that conversation. Some of the managers will already have done this, or intuitively will want to get to know their person and ask questions. But if they needed other questions, or they needed a baseline, some of the questions could be like, how would you define an ideal partnership? What does trust mean to you? What do you need to feel that you belong? How do you like to receive feedback or recognition? Like cultural differences, there's so much cultural differences in how we like to receive feedback or support, or what that looks like. In some cultures, I got to put a strong face on and say everything is fine. And so when someone responds that way, do you dig a little bit more? Do you get curious and ask those questions? So that partnership agreement is there to just start to build that foundation of that relationship. But that was really key. The other piece I wanted to share that we're including is a career development playbook. So, for the students out there, hopefully you're doing that already before, as you're going out, you're trying to get clear about your career vision, your values, your strengths, what are your interests, because when you're going through the interview process, people are going to ask you those questions. But if you didn't get to clarify that, or you're now starting within our company, then having that conversation with your manager, and your manager being able to support you with that is so, so important. And I think that is a belonging piece, because each individual, regardless of your background, is unique, right? So just because someone comes from Latin America, we can't make the assumption that everyone from that part of the world is going to have similar interests. There are going to be some similar traditions and passions, or not passions, but characteristics, but it's still an individual. And that's the main thing that we're focusing on with our people leaders through the onboarding process, is to make sure everybody is getting to know that individual in front of them.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I love that. And I think just that building that trust and relationship from the get-go, and just understanding like how somebody best receives feedback and these pieces, it's so valuable. It's so common that level of connection doesn't sometimes happen. And we know that from a retention perspective, our relationship with our manager, as that relationship is just so critical in terms of retention and productivity and just employee engagement. So thanks for highlighting that, Lorie. Amazing. Does anyone else have anything to add just in terms of onboarding? What are some of the things that we might also dive into? I know.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was just gonna say, like, I think one thing to keep in mind too with onboarding, and especially in a place like Vancouver, that you already have a tremendously diverse talent pool of folks who were born here, let alone folks who may have chosen to migrate. So any employer that's on this call today is already doing a lot of work. I'm sure you are, and you're already in that mindset of, we want to be a dynamic and open and sort of an inclusive workplace. And so when it comes to, by and large, when it comes to integrating immigrant talent into the workplace, it's not like you're going from 0 to 100. Like, you're already doing a lot of work. You have to onboard anybody to begin with. And so it's really about sort of what are those incremental nuances that you might need to keep in mind. Like, don't think of it as this enormous new lift. It's probably what you're already doing, just in a slightly different way. And if you're not already doing some of the things that Lorie and Teresa have talked about, you're already missing the boat on onboarding and how you're retaining that talent, I'm sure. And it's something that you're going to want to look at from a systemic standpoint internally.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I think one of the other things that has come to mind, or that has often come up in terms of new hire, both orientation and also retention strategies of how do we celebrate our people and what's important to them, is around days of observation. And so I know that, Lorie, I know your organization does a lot around even surveying staff on different things. And would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think when we talked about this before the panel, one of the experiences I had in a previous employer was that we created an onboarding survey, and in that survey, we provided that. I think we sent it out around around the 30 days to ask questions about their experience with the interview process and recruitment and the orientation, and just did they have that inclusive experience? Did they have all the information that they needed? Because we want to constantly improve that for everyone. So it wasn't specifically focused on newcomers, but because we were such a, like as Patrick said, we're such a diverse city and community already, we just wanted to make sure we were touching on all the different areas and making sure that we understood and gathered those insights, and then we could take those that feedback and apply it and elevate the experience going forward. But yeah, one of the questions that we would have either in the new hire form before they got started, you know, the form where they would fill it out, or they would be part of Bamboo HR or one of those things, we asked them what are the cultural or significant days that you'd like to celebrate, and then we'd also ask that question through that onboarding survey, and then we would be able to gather those information and make sure that we celebrate those days, or at least share that with the people managers so that they could support their team members as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about onboarding. Maybe we can move to retention. It's like, okay, great. We found the amazing human. We've brought them in. Hopefully, we've onboarded them really well, and they're feeling like they're being taken care of, and that they're cared about, and that they're being included in the team dynamics. And from that retention perspective, it's like, what are some of the key things that we can, some of these tactics, right? And I know we've spent quite a bit of time in the past talking about even cultural intelligence. It's like, how do you create readiness from the team to receive someone new as well from potentially a different culture? I wonder if I could open it up to just discuss from a retention perspective.
Well, I'll give you an example of actually how a company got it wrong. Even just to start, one of our programs is called FAST, Facilitating Access to Skilled Talent, and folks can take it. They can use it overseas. They do an assessment, it includes a prepare for work in Canada piece, and then a technical assessment, or in the case of biotech and life sciences, you actually get a certification from Biotalent Canada out of it if you pass. And so we had a candidate who did that. It takes about 40 hours to do the assessment. So she did it pre-arrival, did well, had a job before she came to Canada in Richmond. And so we were all excited. We said, well, isn't this a tremendous success story? This woman hits the ground in a job that uses her skills and pays her well. But a month or so later, we called up the company just to see how things were going. They said, oh, we let her go. And so we started to ask a few questions. And what where we landed in terms of our assessment of the situation was, like, it was great that this company was open to hiring someone before they even got here. But when you're looking at sort of the fit, and I know fit is not necessarily the term that everyone wants to use, but in looking at sort of the culture of the organization and its ability to incorporate folks who did not already fit a certain mold. What we found out was this was a company in Richmond. Everybody who worked there was of Chinese descent, and every hire had previously been an intern or like a co-op student. And so this person had never been a co-op student and was of Indian descent. And so, so there was something there that just didn't like just didn't fit well, because and the assumption that we walked away with was because she was of a different background, because she had not been sort of trained up as a student in the organization, then the organization didn't know what to do with her. And so it's something that we've sort of had to keep in mind now when we see some of the folks that use our programs, is to be a little more hands-on with the employer to try and figure out any of these bumps in the road that could happen, hopefully before they do, and address them.
Yeah, that sounds like really unique in terms of the makeup of the organization.
Well, in so many ways, this would be like a success story. You have a company that's, populated largely with, in many cases, folks who are newcomers themselves, and isn't it great? And the company's doing well, and then all of a sudden they just don't know how to incorporate a different profile of newcomer.
Right.
And so,
yeah. So I think it speaks to like the importance of that readiment, I think, and just like, ensuring that there's like an open dialogue happening with individuals within the organization. It's like, okay, what might we need to know about the individual that's coming in? How do they communicate? Is it an individualistic or collective society that they're coming from, even in terms of how they might describe the work that they do, or how they're showing up from that perspective? And so I think the employers that are doing it well and sort of starting to dive into this cultural intelligence piece are finding like it's quite remarkable in terms of how much more cohesion you can gain with team members, and far quicker, and then you're getting this productivity sort of amplified. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, other sort of pieces when somebody in terms of the retention piece, even from a social perspective, because I know having brought people in from across the globe over 20 years myself, it's like, okay, somebody's arrived, it's like, how do we best ensure, are we buddying them up with someone, for example? What are we doing to ensure that they have friends that they can go for lunch with? Even, are there ways, and maybe we could just speak to some of the different, even just whether it be Slack or other mechanisms to engage.
I feel like you might be looking at me.
I am.
Okay, because I was like I was trying to see the body language of Teresa. Yeah, I think it was because we talked about an example again in a previous employment where we created a newcomers guide. And that was really important, specifically is for people who were new to Canada. So it would have information on like our taxes and how to get a driver's license. So obviously there's a lot of resources on that. But we also created a newcomers channel because we were getting a lot of requests for like what restaurants to go to. Like I'm looking for Mexican food or Chinese food or whatever. It was a diverse group of people, and it was just nice to have a place for them, because that was the way that the company that I was at communicated. So not, maybe some companies might have Teams or Slack, and maybe there's another form of communication. Maybe it's a bulletin board. I don't know how I think most people are here more techie, but it's just making sure that you're creating a space that is allowing for the community to ask those types of questions, and they just build upon it. Like as so many of the other newcomers who had just arrived maybe even a year before that were, hey, this is where I would go and this is how I did it. So I think that was very helpful. And then you've already mentioned the buddy program. I think if you don't have a buddy program, it's really important, especially for newcomers, to feel like there's somebody there.
Yeah. Even joining ERGs. I know we're almost at time here. So, but I know some organizations might have employee resource groups, for example, for different which could be an opportunity to create a sense of further inclusion as well. I know that we have to sort of close it off, but I wanted to I know that we were previously talking a little bit about respectful workplace training, which many organizations do. And then, how do we go beyond sort of the laws around, the basics around, bullying or harassment or things like that. And would you mind maybe just closing things off here and speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm just really lucky that that MindSense is investing in a position like my position and my role to create a learning and development strategy. So not a lot of companies would have that resource, and we'd have to go externally for that. And I would highly recommend Frame and Associates for Rebecca Frame, who does a lot of respectful workplace type of training. So please connect with her. But because I'm in-house and that's something that I can do, what we're going to focus on beyond the law piece is we're creating a leadership essentials program that will train our leaders on how to have an inclusive mindset and how to create a culture with psychological safety. So, think about those relationships and giving the skills to help your leaders to create that safe space or that welcoming space for newcomers and all of your diverse team members. And that's pretty much it. I did add some cultural intelligence tools, so we will incorporate that, and we are also going to do respectful workplace training.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we're sadly sort of not sadly, we've sort of concluded the employer piece, I would say, just with the time that we have allocated. And so now I'm really excited to dive in. We've got many engaged students that had shared a couple of key themes and questions that we're going to kind of dive into. And then Angela is also with us over at Hi. Okay, and so I believe you're going to throw up or Slido. Maybe you can mute for just a sec. Yeah, beautiful. And so for the students that okay.
Oh, I know. Yeah, exactly.
Kathy, you just muted yourself.
Just trying to mute. Amazing. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback. If we could just ensure that everyone is muted. Thank you. And then we've got this QR code that if you have questions, you can pop those in. Happy to have that up there. And we're going to just dive in right off the back here. So one of the questions that sort of came up was, how do you balance being adaptable and flexible to market forces while creating the career that you really like? And I wanted to just sort of open this up to the panel as a starting place.
I can jump in if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great, Teresa.
Okay, so yeah, that's almost like a how do you live your life question sometimes, because everything changes. If that's one thing that's constant. So the first thing that's the most important, and something that I coach executives on, because you would not believe how many executives really don't know this, but is like to know yourself. So if I'm going to use a metaphor, if you're a car, what kind of car are you? Are you a Ferrari? Are you a Buick? Are you a Humvee? Like, what kind of car are you? And how you identify that is understanding more about your strengths, not just what you're strong at, but what your energizing strengths are. You can look at Marcus Buckingham in Strengths Finder, talks about real strengths. I call them super strengths in my practice, are the things that you're energized by and you're good at or getting good at. Understanding your interests and your values. So many times we spend our lives trying to focus on the gaps we have, and being aware of those is important, but how much time are we devoting towards noticing what is energizing us through the day? So those are some of the ways you can find your interests and your values. You can work with a coach or ask people. It's like, what do you see me so excited about? So knowing yourself, I think, is one of the most important things to being able to navigate, because it's like if you don't realize you're a Ferrari and you happen to be on a gravel road, it's not going to go very well. It doesn't matter how cute and pretty the Ferrari is. If you're on the wrong road because you're not aware of yourself as a Ferrari, to beat the metaphor to death, it's very important to have that awareness. The second one is the stay curious. So do the research and the learning. So some of you might like this, some of you might not, but schedule some time each week to keep up with some changes in your industry. new skills, new trends, and so forth. And then keep an eye out for overlap. What are ways that you can connect your interests with what's in demand? I have done 2 massive pivots, and they're terrifying in my career. And they happened because I was keeping an eye out for certain types of skill sets and how to communicate myself in a way that they could understand, and do the work for them to understand how my skills could match for them. The other one I would say is staying flexible. So I'm on like point 4. I wrote some notes ahead of time for all of you. So staying flexible, but staying true. So be open to how you reach to your goals, but keep staying true to you, that integrity. And the other one is keeping on adapting. So you might need a certification somewhere. I remember having to take a job as a waitress when I swore I would never waitress again because I just didn't enjoy the particular role, even though I love waitresses everywhere. And I was angry about it. But if I hadn't taken the waitressing job, I wouldn't have gotten my job at Electronic Arts. Go figure. You do not know where those jobs are going to come from. And nurturing your community is the last one. Nobody gets there alone. Nobody does. And so whether it's your peers, whether it's community, reaching out, Lorie laughs because I talk about informational interviewing all the time. It's the thing that helped me get my career, moving from a singer-songwriter into a video game recruiter. Like, how is that possible? But it was because I kept informational interviewing with people. And the smart people realized that someone helped them. Someone talked to them before to help them get to where they are now as a successful leader, executive, or what have you. So being able to maximize those relationships, and if you can, create a system for yourself, a spreadsheet where you keep track of who you talked to and what you said last. And, I know it feels awkward sometimes as a student where you feel like you're taking all the time, asking and at some point you just want to stop feeling like you have to take. Well, keep track of all the things you ask for, because in a few months and a few years, when you're hit a certain level of perspective or success or whatever you want to define it, you're going to be able to reach back to those people and be like, hey, I thought of you. I saw this conference. You'd be such a great speaker for it. Like, reach back out and pay the debt, give. And then this wonderful cycle can build through the rest of your career that can help you temper the fluctuations in the market by the strength of the relationships that you have. That's just my 2 cents.
Oh, I love it. I honestly, I think the way you frame that too, it's like the question is largely around like having a philosophy on the way that you live. And I think the only thing that I'll just quickly just add, because I think when you're first starting out, there is sort of this element of being a bit more flexible and adaptable, to your point about, taking the job as, a waitress, even though you maybe didn't want to initially, and where it leads. And then it's like when you put yourself into these positions and you stay engaged and you're present and you're saying yes and to opportunities that then kind of come about, we can live like, I think, I don't know, you get it gets kind of exciting. I think that there's these opportunities that come to us, and when we're living from a place of knowing ourselves, to your point, of what we're passionate about, what lights us up, what we feel like isn't really work, but that we're really good at, and lining those strengths, as we sort of progress in our career, we can get choosier as well. And so I loved what you said about just like, where do you find those alignment points, and leaning into the things that you're really good at, or that there's this innate strength that you might have. So I think that that's just fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Oh, I love this. Okay. So another quick question here. So does a Canadian employer really value my professional experience outside of Canada? Do I keep these experiences on my resume, or should I focus or highlight volunteer, part-time, campus involvement at UBC instead, since it's local and current experience? Anybody want to tackle that?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it depends. However, the data shows us that by and large, they do not. Like, by and large, employers do not recognize your international experience or credentials at full value.
Like across, like that's what the research says. I'm a little bit.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, we see it in immigrant underemployment. Now the difference is, you add a Canadian credential on top of that international credential, and then you get you get essentially full credit again for it. So it's if you're just someone who shows up to the country as a permanent resident, your education and your experience will get discounted significantly. So those of you who are studying and getting a credential at UBC, you're going to be much farther ahead in that case. It's not hopeless though, but I mean, but I'm not going to be dishonest.
And Patrick, I'd also argue, I don't know, but like how progressive employers are, right? As well is a big piece of that. Would you agree? Like, because I think that there's probably employers that they're already hiring international students, that it might be, or international people, it might be different. Would you think?
Oh, absolutely. There are absolutely progressive employers that are out there, and there are absolutely people who are seeing success. And what we're seeing is that newcomers are making more money faster than they used to as well. So they're catching up. So that penalty essentially that they face is lessening at a faster rate than it used to. But what I would say though, and like I said, it's not a hopeless situation, but I'm also not going to tell you something that's not true. You know, if this is the case and the data bears it out, you know, and so it behooves you to be aware of that.
Yeah.
But I suggest that you take a look at what it is you actually did and what it is you actually learned prior to coming to Canada. So not looking so much at the job title, not looking so much at the name of the degree or the diploma, but what were those tangible skills that you acquired or that you demonstrated in doing so? And then look for those jobs that that are looking for those skills. And you know, engineers are something that we talk about often in this space. And so we talk about engineers driving taxi cabs, or they talk about engineers being underemployed. Well, the thing is that no one is a professional engineer in BC unless the regulator says that you're a professional engineer. And that's where people's minds go when you talk about an engineer. But there's so much skill that is behind an engineering designation or an education, then that's where I would emphasize. That's where I would put the emphasis, is to really tease out those skills and put those forward against jobs that are looking for people who can solve the sorts of problems for employers that you can clearly do and that you've done elsewhere. And so to reframe it that way goes a long way to overcoming the challenges to sort of meaningful employment.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add something to that because I kind of agree with Kathy. I think it really depends on the organization out there. I feel like if any employer that's on this call has joined this conversation, you're here for a reason, because you care and you're open, you want to learn, you want to create that culture that's inclusive, and you're probably using all the wonderful resources that TAP has in their EDI dashboard and whatnot. But I wanted to just share a personal experience, because I had a call with Teresa just before this, and I was saying that we were looking at that question and trying to figure out how do we answer that. Because like when I was in school at UBC Commerce, I actually applied for ASIC. I think the students on this call would know what ASIC is, and it's a nonprofit organization that does exchanges for people in Canada to have experience international. And you know, that was 25 years ago, where I was wanting to gain international experience, even though I was from Canada. So I feel like it's interesting. I feel like now today we do want more of that international experience, because we're such a more global company with the connection of social media and in the internet and everything else. So I just want to give you some hope out there. There's going to be that leader, that person, that one who connects with you, or that mentor that is going to advocate and sponsor you. You just got to keep going, keep connecting, build those relationships, and the people that honor and respect and see your strengths, they will see you.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Thanks, Lorie. Yeah, I think from my perspective, when I'm looking at resumes, I will look at international experience. I recognize, like, I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion, person, and I like very focused on that. And I've worked in sectors of the economy where easily a third of the employees are international. at most of the companies that I've worked at in some capacity. So in the past. So I think that for me, my advice would be around translating any terminology into what's understandable locally and for the companies that you're applying for. And that takes a bit of legwork. And that's where going out for the coffees and doing the informational interviews is so valuable, because you start to understand the nuances of like, oh, this is what that means to an employer from their perspective, and really taking that perspective taking, and then being able to present it uniquely in a way that is like, oh, now I can showcase my unique skills and experience that really resonates in that Canadian context. And so I feel like it's, I've definitely seen scenarios where very senior individuals are coming into Canada and they're accepting positions lower than what they were maybe abroad, but then there's these opportunities for them to like show up and do an amazing job and blow people's minds, and like they get laddered quickly. So it is a delicate balance, I think, and I think employers have an obligation, and like I think there's an ethical piece around not taking advantage and like recognizing the skills in front of them and like educating themselves on what that looks like. But the easier that the candidate can make it for the employer to see what those direct lines look like, it's like, oh, I'm pulling out the direct, requirements at their job and showing how I've done that before, whether it be through the interview process, whether it be, in an informational interview, whether it be through like your CV and your LinkedIn profile, and like looking at all these different avenues and channels to apply, I think is my suggestion. And also recognizing that not every organization is very hierarchical, if you will, or like there's some very flat organizations out there. I currently work for one that is like very, very flat, right? And so the pieces around what that looks like in terms of career progression and expertise in your field can also be very different as well, depending on the nature and the culture of the organization. So those are just a couple of quick shares around that. Just checking in with Angela. We're good to keep going on these questions, so we will. So and just one of the questions that did come in was around what type of role or level should I be applying to? So if they apply to a role based on their experience, they may not get calls, for example, but applying for a more junior or intermediate role, but they might be feared that they're being overqualified, for example. Does and this is one of those, it sort of depends, but I'm wondering if one of us might tackle that sort of what level do you apply to, knowing it's a bit dependent, of course, but maybe an example.
I don't have an example, but it's a tough situation, and it's not confined to an immigrant population. It's also for people pivoting in careers. Like, you'll encounter this every step of the way. So, I tried to make one pivot in my career where I was too qualified in one end and too junior on the other end, and it didn't work out, and I had to pivot in a whole other way. But I can't imagine how challenging it feels coming from a place where you're celebrated, you're at a certain level of seniority, and then you come to a country where there's no value in what you have done. So how do you move forward from there? And to me, it's just like I told the company to increase, try to do as much as you can to find people, increasing your ability wherever possible. I know it's going to be very job specific, but as many companies as you can. And sometimes we have to take the job that's not as great, gets the foot in the door, gets you acclimated, all the different sorts of things that can be beneficial. But like Kathy was saying, there's no one way. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you've got a recruiter like me on the line, I'm going to try and understand your experience, where you're at, and make sure that we place you. And like, to me, that's dignity. We treat you with dignity, but like Kathy was saying, a lot of recruitment is not so sophisticated to be able to understand where you place. So again, the emphasis goes towards you. My apologies on behalf of all of the
I
master
know.
interview processes out there, but the emphasis does go to you to talk to people as much as you can to find the information. And I know UBC's got a wonderful career services that has some wonderful ways to acclimate you to that, but I don't have a perfect answer because it's a very unique situation for each one, and I know it can be very frustrating. Or I have empathy that it can be very frustrating, I should say.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that it depends. It's just there's a combination of the employer's willingness and readiness coupled with that just drawing the lines as clearly as you can. And that's like it's kind of an investigatory bit of work, right? In terms of researching informational interviews, finding maybe individuals that work in the organization or in the sector, figuring out what the languaging is. You know, could you go for a coffee and you're like, hey, could you share one other suggestion or contact for me? And just like showing up in a state where you're willing to receive anything that, you know, any potential lead and can really help the path, and trying to stay positive in that and showing up as your best self in that process, which can be really challenging. If it, you know, at times it can be frustrating and you're like, you know, if you're feeling as though you're not being seen for the skills and attributes that you have to bring. But it's like, how do you, from a mindset perspective, be the person that's showing up and it's like, whoa, I want to work with that person. Like that person, I want that person on my team because they're just like a ray of sunshine and positivity, and they're going to offer something that, you know, helps round out the team, that you just never know what the employer is looking for as well. So I just, yeah, I can appreciate that it can be also very challenging. Any other closing remarks just on the types of roles that people should be applying for? We've got another question here that we can dive into.
I just pick up on what you were saying there, Kathy, and there are mentoring opportunities out there as well. At IECBC, we have a mentoring program that we've been able to open up to international students. You know, something that previously was only there for permanent residents, and so there, you know, it's a low risk way to make connections in industry and to get some of those insights and some of those connections that Kathy was just talking about.
That's amazing.
And I guess, and sorry, just one other thing too. Don't be discouraged if some employers aren't getting back to you. You have to keep in mind the Canadian economy is structured in an unusual way, certainly compared to the American economy. We don't have lots of massive national champions. Like Canada's economy is a collection of small businesses. And like the employers that are on this call today actually represent some of the larger businesses that would be out there, even if you've only got 30, 40, 50 employees. And so, you know, that poses challenges too for the business, and then for those who want to go to work for them as well. So just as you might run into a situation where an employer is not getting back to you for an informational interview or whatnot, you know, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with you. It's more to do with what's going on at that employer's workshop that day. And so try not to be too discouraged.
I think that's a really important thing to highlight. I think it's easy to take that personally, and sometimes it's just resources, time. It's sometimes unfortunate that as HR people or recruitment folks, we can't be necessarily as responsive as we also would love to be sometimes. I just think that's a really, really important and pertinent piece, just to continue to be persistent, and to keep, you know, looking at what other layers or other ways to present the information or to tweak things might be. Yeah, I was gonna just share one last question here. So what is the reality of employers seeking Canadian experience? So we've often heard this, you know, that people are looking for Canadian experience, and that's maybe the reason why international people aren't being hired. What are we seeing ourselves just as a piece of this? Is it obviously we've kind of talked a bit about just employers educating themselves, and there's that, readiness piece. But I'm just curious if there's any thoughts around these realities. And it was actually posed as even legalities. And so because I'm not a lawyer, I won't speak to the legalities, but what I would,
Well, there are some places in Canada that have made it illegal to ask that. Like, you're just not allowed to ask for Canadian experience, and like, I think Ontario might be one of those jurisdictions. Like, I've largely looked at it from a question of, oh, sorry, can you hear me? Because I see my video's frozen on my end. Okay.
Oh, you're good.
What I've largely looked at it from from a lot of the employers that we worked with, from a sense of trying to be confident that that person or that candidate understands the Canadian context of the workplace. Like, absolutely, there might be more nefarious things, going on behind the scenes for some employers, but by and large, I think it's really that question of, and I go back to the fact that, again, they're small businesses by and large. They want to be sure that when they bring someone into the workplace, that they know how their colleagues would expect them to engage with them, or perhaps would expect them to engage with them.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. So Angela, any last questions?
I think, yeah, a lot of what you've asked the panelists and the audience were definitely questions that are top of mind for the students and new grads. So thank you so much for addressing those and sharing your insights and thoughts.
Beautiful. Maybe we can go to the next slide and we'll close things off. If there's any final questions, you can feel free to pop them in the chat. If there's any closing last thoughts. I just wanted to really acknowledge UBC Saunders, for the School of Business. Thank you for collaborating on this event and for sharing so readily. We're really excited to be able to offer these diversity, equity, inclusion opportunities for learning for the ecosystem. And also want to thank the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Resource Hub sustainability sponsors. So the Vancouver Post Alliance, obviously UBC Saunders, thank you, Innovate BC, Lighthouse Labs, Orbital Learning, Northeastern Vancouver, and also the Government of Canada. So just grateful for the sponsors that have kept things going. And we're really excited. The Diversity Dashboard is an annual report that comes out each year. And we share this, it comes out of Technology and People Network. We do a massive salary review survey across Canada, and it's a really big data set. And from that, we ask employers a lot of questions around their diversity and inclusion practices, and pull data from that. And so, we're going to be releasing this data. Usually we do a press release. We'll probably be doing that late November, early December. And just really wanted to thank everyone, largely our sponsors, Invest Vancouver and Sun Life. And thank you so much for everyone for taking the time to attend the session, and to hopefully you can use what you've learned, and we can all be showing up in a beautiful and loving way. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. My name is Kathy Gibson, and we'll also be sharing out an aftercare email that will have some of the resources and the tips that have been identified today. So for example, Patrick mentioned mentorship. We'll make sure to include that link, and Lorie mentioned Rebecca. We'll throw that in. It's like we'll try to have some valuable links that we've shared in the chat channel as well, so that you can reference, and feel free to link in with the individuals that are on this call. Thank you so much, everyone. And somehow managing to finish it exactly on time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.